collectors, and welcome to another Bossk Bounty video, and welcome to episode 245 of Ask Bossk Bounty. This is the weekly Q&A series where I answer your questions. If you do have a question for next week's episode and you want to be featured in the video, be sure to leave that question in the comment section of this video, and hopefully your question will be picked for next week. With all that being said, if you do happen to enjoy the video, hit the like button down below, subscribe if you're new to the channel. And this week's episode of Ask Bossk Bounty, being it episode 245, is sponsored by VC45, the clone trooper from Attack of the Clones. Now, even though this is a pretty cool card back with a pretty decent action scene going on there on the card, I'm actually pleased that this figure is way in the past. It's the skinny clone. I've never been a really big fan of it, and now we have an all-new clone body, Phase 1 and Phase 2, which has basically superseded this. So I'm happy about that, but it's still a good one for the history books. VC45, back in the day, this one was quite an expensive one to get on the secondary market. Since then, they did reissue it in TVC 2.0, kept the number VC45, straight reissue, and yeah, skinny clones, not really my thing, never have been. Glad they've been replaced. Also, it is an extremely windy day here in the UK. We are getting battered by a storm, so if you can hear the storm in the background, I do apologise. So let's get on to the first question, and it's from Cisco Deer, and he says, question for next week: do you think Hasbro will fix the legs for Dedra Meero for the TVC line set for 2025? Thanks, Bossk. So that particular figure of Dedra Meero, I doubt will get fixed. She's pretty much in the first wave of 2025, along with Luke Skywalker, you know, the farm boy Luke. And I'm pretty sure even one person at least in the world has that wave. I saw it on John Miko's Facebook group. So that figure has been produced basically. It's out there, it's in factories, ready to go. What I would say is that it could potentially change Hasbro's mind on any future female officers that they may have had planned to make. Maybe with the backlash that Dedra got, and rightly so, maybe they'll rethink that and actually do the legs properly, because obviously they've now got that female upper body officer sculpt, which they can use for different characters, and I'm sure they would have planned to, but maybe they're going to have to rethink that and you know, update the legs for all future female officer figures. Scott Borum says, hey BB, question for next week: we seem to be getting more playsets, creatures and ships, problem being they're mostly from the new media. Given a lot of collectors are a bit sick of the Mando and Ahsoka overload, do you think it would kill Hasbro to make some more from the OT and to actually make some from the PT? Cheers from all the not another Mando fans. Well, I guess it's how you look at it really. I mean, to be honest, if you do look at the amount of playsets that we've had since TVC 2.0 was around, I would say that it's a fair split between OT and new media, and that's coming from somebody that prefers original trilogy. If you think about it, we've got the Tantive 4 playset, we've got the Carbon Freezing Chamber, we've got the Endor playset, we've got the Jabba's Palace, we've got the original Jabba's Palace, like the Adventure set. So we have got quite a few, and when we look at the new media, we've got obviously the Armorer's Forge, we've got the new Imperial Cruiser playset, and we've got the Cantina from the Mandalorian as well. I think that might be it. You could talk about other things that we've had from new media as well, vehicles, E-Wings, things like that. But I do honestly think it's a pretty fair split. What I would say is the prequel trilogy is definitely lacking in things like that, and just lacking in the vintage collection as a whole. And I really do think they will address that. Maybe not in 2025, maybe not in 2027 because it's the 50th anniversary of Star Wars, but maybe in that year between. Maybe we'll see some prequel stuff in that year. I personally feel that's the time to do it. I think I mentioned this in last week's episode. If you think about how things are going, that kind of is the year for them to do it, really. And so I would agree with you, more prequel trilogy, but when it comes to original trilogy versus new media, in terms of playsets, vehicles and things like that, I think it's kind of like a 50-50 split, to be honest. It may not seem like that, though, because obviously this year has been heavily towards Mandalorian. Nerdy Figure Collector says, great video as always. Question for next week: why do you think the Black Series has way more stuff than the Vintage Collection? I think Black Series has 5, while TVC has only 1. Your thoughts? Keep up the good work. So he's specifically talking about Gift the Galaxy, which is the campaign that Hasbro are running at the moment. It's been going for 3 or 4 weeks now, and he's absolutely right. Black Series does have more than TVC. We only have the 1 reveal for TVC. And whilst I would say that it is disappointing and it does seem like it's unfair, what you've got to kind of realise is that there is a number of figures, vehicles, playsets that are scheduled for any one year, both for Black Series and the Vintage Collection, and there's nothing we can do to change that. It all just depends on how and when they reveal it. is the only difference really. So next year, let's just say, for example, we're scheduled for 50 figures. I'm just plucking a figure out the air. We're getting 2 vehicles and 2 playsets, for example. It doesn't really matter when those are revealed to us. It's not going to change what we're actually getting, if that makes sense. Sure, it would be nice if that whenever they do a reveal, there is a fair split between the two, but it just doesn't really work like that. They have different release dates for certain Black Series figures over TVC and vice versa, basically. So that's all I can say from a positive point of view. Negative point of view, of course, the Black Series is always going to win over TVC in terms of how many things they get, how many new sculpts they get, and all that kind of thing. And, you know, we've talked about it many times before why that is, but, you know, it's just the way it is at the moment, and hopefully things will improve in the future. Brendan Draper says, great video as always. Question for next week. We have a lot of background characters in the line. Which scenes would you like to see more characters from? From me, I'd love to see more Jabba's Palace, especially Puppet Sly Snootles and Kane Addis. Yeah, I mean, I always look at what I display in terms of, you know, my loose collection, and, you know, there is a big presence for Jabba's Palace, and there will soon to be a big presence for the Cantina. So, of course, I'm always going to be looking at, like, you know, background Cantina aliens and things like that I would personally like more of, even though we do have, you know, a fair amount of them now. But in terms of ones that really desperately need updating, there's a few of them, isn't there, that could do with updating. So I always look at those. I'm with you though, Kane Addis would be a very, very cool one. But background characters, you know, you could even look at the Skeleton Crew right now and like the cool sort of pirate figures, all the different aliens. If they made some of the figures from Jabba's Palace, maybe like an Ishi-Tib character or species, whatever that species is called, then, you know, that head sculpt could be used for one of the pirate figures from Skeleton Crew, for example, because I'm pretty sure one of those is in that show. So here we have a really long question from Clemmer, and instead of reading it all out, I'm going to give you the crux of it, basically. He's saying, you know, is it a good thing to have like exclusive figures locked behind, you know, HasLabs and things like that? And when we're looking at the previous HasLabs, it's like versions of other figures, but when we're looking at the Cantina, you're actually getting the Tonica Sisters and the Barman, which essentially are going to be exclusive to that set and may not be released ever again in the line. So ultimately, my opinion on this is there's two sides to every coin. First of all, you've got the people that aren't really interested in the play sets and the vehicles and things like that, and they just want the carded figures. Now for them, it's a bit unfortunate that they're having to shell out a lot of money for a big ticket item just to get those carded figures. So that's one side of the argument I can completely understand and sympathize with. However, the people that do back these HasLabs kind of should be rewarded for doing so, in my opinion. I think it's always nice to have something exclusive about a HasLab that you're backing. Now, if we take the Barge, for example, they brought in that exclusive yak face at the very last minute to help push it over the line. And sometimes I feel like the HasLabs kind of need that as well, because you kind of need the people that are carded collectors to sort of push these on, just as much as you need the people that are like looking for an investment and might buy 2 or 3 of them, keep one for 10 years, hopefully make some money on it and things like that. There's all different reasons why people collect these things. So for me, on one hand, being somebody that likes the HasLabs and likes the actual vehicles and playsets that we're getting, it is always nice to be kind of rewarded with the fact that you're getting something exclusive as well. I really wanted the Barge, but when they announced that carded yak face on the Power of the Force card, being a carded collector as well, I just thought, I've got to have that. I really need that, you know? And I'm sure there's lots of people out there that are the same, that just really wanted that card back. Also, when you're looking at things like the sort of cheaper playset, like the Imperial Cruiser set that we recently got, I personally feel that the Mandalorian Privateer that we have here was actually a pretty good choice for that set. At the end of the day, it's an army builder, so people that want to buy multiples of that set for a larger diorama, a larger hallway, will get multiples of that figure. And of course, for people that just want the carded figure, it's not too expensive to get it, keep the carded figure, and then they can sell on the set to somebody again that wants to build a bigger diorama. So for me, this sort of thing is like a win-win. I quite like the packed in figure sort of thing, but I can completely understand, you know, when people feel that some really exclusive must-have figures are, you know, are locked behind an expensive HasLab. I could definitely see that side of the argument as well. So I honestly don't really know what the answer to it is personally, but that's just my sort of 2 cents on it. Damien Addington says, hello BB, excellent video as always. Question for next week, do you have a favourite Star Wars toy collection outside Hasbro 3.75 inch figures? Mine is the Galoob Micro Machines that got made between 1993 and 2000s. Thank you in advance. I have a few of those. I did love those, but for me, all day long, it has to be Lego Star Wars. I think Lego do an amazing job with the Lego sets. I think the most recent set I got was the Cantina as it goes. I haven't built it yet, it's still in its box. Just don't have room for it, but man, what a set that is. And again, that's a great example. Lego do it as well. There's lots of minifigures in that Cantina set which are exclusive to that set. You can only get them if you buy that large Cantina, and there are people in the Lego Star Wars community that just collect minifigures, and that's it. Indy Owen says, greetings, question for next week. With the last figure standing showing for Bad Batch, do you think it moves the Marauder up on the HasLab lists of things to make? I just don't see them releasing more Bad Batch figures without the ship. If they did release the figures on their own, then what would they put with the ship for a HasLab? So, like any of these fan polls that are run, you know, last figure standing, March Madness, things like that, it's definitely something that Hasbro look at and sort of add to their own data, if you like. And I would say that, you know, the Bad Batch doing so well in last figure standing does really sort of push on that message to Hasbro that, you know, these are wanted figures. At the moment, poor old Hunter is by himself. He has nobody to go with. And I would suggest, which I've mentioned in other videos, that I personally feel at this point in time, the best way to get the rest of the crew out is to do a HasLab with the Marauder ship. And I think it would do well. I personally do think that. I think it would do well, maybe as well as the Ghost. I don't think it needs to be as big or as expensive as the Ghost. And then they can get one version of the figures out with the HasLab, and then another version of the figures just repainted in their Season 2 colours or whatever out in the main line, or whichever way round they want to do it, you know. Again, we're talking about locking potential sort of characters behind an expensive HasLab, but at least it's like previous ones where it's just a different costume of an existing character. Wyvern says, hi Bossk, I always look forward to Sunday in your Q&A vids. Question for next week, we've had a lot of love for the Empire over the last 2 years with definitive Stormtrooper figure, new Imperial Officer mould, new Clone Troopers, new Snow Trooper coming, not to mention the Endor Scout Trooper and a new ATST. Is it high time for some new Rebel figures? The Fleet Trooper, Hoth Trooper and Endor Commandos all have outdated swivel hips and are badly in need of a refresh. We did get the X-Wing Pilot 4-pack this year, so do you think we'll ever see some new Rebel army builders? Here is hoping Andor Season 2 gives Hasbro the excuse to make some new Rebel Commandos. Possibly, but I think maybe Andor might give them an excuse to make more Empire figures, considering it's a heavily sort of Empire era series. But you're right, I mean, we do lack certain Rebel troopers. I always say that they did miss the boat with the Return of the Jedi 40th anniversary and not doing the Rebel Commando again. They could have done a single carded figure and they could have done an Army Builder 4-pack, and in my opinion they would have sold really well. We're missing the soldiers from Rogue One as well for the assault on Scarif. We're missing those. So there's two. I mean, we have had army builders of Rebel figures. We've had, you know, as you mentioned, the Hoth guys and also the Rebel Fleet Troopers, but you are completely right. They are out of date. They do have the swivel hips. And yeah, it would be nice if we had updated versions of those. So whether I think that will happen is another matter entirely. But yeah, sure, I do agree with you. There is a kind of bias towards Empire figures. But then, you know, figures that have got helmets on, it is a lot easier to do army builders with those rather than like generic sort of humans. Dan Von Carr says, question for next week, do you think we'll get a Troop Builder Zombie Death Trooper pack or at least a single carded zombie? I think we will do at some point. I think it's a reasonably easy one for them to do using some of the parts of the existing Death Trooper. Of course, that one desperately needs the new style hips. The legs on that figure have never been great. But I'm sure there's some parts of that figure that they could use for the zombie version, and considering they could do that, I would imagine it would be on the cards at some point. Reno AZ says, great vid as always. Tim, question for next week. When do you think the remaining pipelined and New Hope figures will be released? Ben, Han, Chewie, Mo Monadon, thanks and happy holidays. So I'm not too sure whether you mean they'll be revealed or released. So I presume they'll be revealed hopefully early next year. Judging by the sort of waves that have been announced already with the fan channel wave and the mainline wave, I kind of think that those figures will be in maybe a wave or two after that. So if we're looking at maybe when we'll actually have them in our hands, possibly July, August time maybe. That's just my prediction. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. So if that's the case, then hopefully they'll be revealed maybe February, March at some of the sort of conventions and things like that are happening at the time. Zamot Rogue says, question for next week, Garandan 2025, what you think? My heart says yes, my head says no. And that's all I can say really. But I would love it to happen, man. Mitchell Gum says, per the six-pack idea, they could take Farm Boy, Luke, Vader, Chewie, Han, Leia and Stormtrooper and release the same figures they just made and pipelined, Han and Chewie, and do a six-pack on alternate card backs. Hello, Power of the Force. No new tooling required. I'd even take more of the 2-packs with alt card backs. Most of the time they arrive unpunched and undamaged since they are shipped in the 2-pack box. Question for next week. Even though Mandalorian has received a ton of figures already, what is your number one from the series that still has not been released? Pelimoto, The Client, Moff Gideon, Beskar Armor. I'm still in disbelief they've not made any of the Season 1 Prison Break gang, Migs Mayfeld, etc. The Client would be my number one at this moment in time. So yeah, it's whether I feel that I want to go back to Season 1 and fill out some of those gaps like The Client, like Season 1 Grief Karga, things like that. Or maybe I look ahead to Season 3 and some of the biggies that we're missing from that, like, as you said, Moff Gideon, Beskar Armor, and more importantly, that cool trooper, the Imperial sort of commando trooper in the Beskar Armor, the white guys. They look fantastic. Considering I think it's likely that we will get a Moff Gideon in Beskar and that commando as well. So I'd probably have to go with Season 1 Grief Karga. That's what I'm going for. I think he's in loads of scenes. We've got all the other characters that go with him. So yeah, that's my choice. Collect says, with the upcoming 50th anniversary, damn, that means we are getting old, and the Mando and Grogu movie, how far along do you think Hasbro is with producing the figures, especially for the film? Back in the George Lucas days, we had the giant release plus 4 to 5 waves hitting the same year. Is this possibly why we may see less in the next year or so? And do you think we will have a line packaged based purely in the film, 5 POA, 10 POA, and keep the TVC based purely in previous media with a few select characters chosen for TVC? Sorry for the long-winded question. So I hope that's not the case, because when I looked at things like Rogue One, for example, you know, it really annoyed me that we got Bodhi and Baze Malbus in a 5 POA line, but we didn't get them in the vintage collection. That really did annoy me at the time. So I hope they don't do that. I think having 2 lines of figures splits the budget essentially, and I would rather it all go to the vintage collection. And in terms of how far along are they, Chris the designer, when I was at MCM Comic Con, said they are, you know, well in there with 2026 in terms of determining what that is going to be like. I presume that they would have got some material from the Mando and Grogu film from Lucasfilm, and plus some of the characters obviously we've already seen before, so maybe they're in a slightly different outfit or have a different accessory or something, God forbid. But you know what I mean. You know, there's certain things about that movie that we kind of know about already. And also there was a trailer as well at, what was it, D23 I think it was, like a private viewing trailer which leaked online. So, you know, Hasbro have obviously got that, and they've got references and things like that. So we will see stuff from that film without a doubt in 2026. You know, they really are quite ahead in terms of, you know, what's coming for 2026. So it's all really exciting stuff. Can't wait to see what it all is. But yeah. Okay, then that's it for this week's episode. Thank you all for watching, and don't forget to leave your questions for next week's episode in the comment section below. Let's have loads of questions once again, so I've got plenty to choose from to keep this series going. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks to my Patreon supporters and channel members. As always, your support means a great deal to me, so thank you so much, and we shall see you on the next one.